So this week we're going to look at Aristotle. But before then, let's backtrack a little bit and take a look at Socrates. Last week you read Plato, and Plato was a pupil of Socrates, as Aristotle was a pupil of Plato. So these three guys are considered, the triumvirate of ancient Greece. They are considered, the fathers of philosophy. Um, so those are the big three names. Socrates, who never wrote a thing, his pupil Plato, and then Plato's pupil Aristotle. So let's take a look at Socrates. You might have heard of the Socratic method, and you can view it here, right? What is the Socratic method? This is considered a way to elicit from students a pursuit of knowledge. So it is not the teacher giving a lecture. It is not the teacher giving answers. There is not even giving the teacher feedback. It's you get a position from the student and you continue to question what the student is saying. And the idea is to force the student into analyzing their position deeply. So you probably have had Socratic questioning in your formal education. Maybe you've had, Socratic dialogues that happen in class. And it is truly a way to help train the mind into figuring out, how to analyze, how to weigh things, how to synthesize, all of these kind of words. So we can go back to Socrates for that. He was also the kind of teacher who would talk and walk, or peripatetic, which is, all of his pupils would be dressed in their little togas, and Socrates would be walking and spouting things off, and his students would be following him around. So that's where we also get that kind of style, which is not used as much as I think it should be. But anyway, there are some examples of Socratic questions. If you're going to go to law school, this is something that you will get trained in very deeply. But also, look at some of those questions. You can ask yourself them as you're reading something, as you're trying to figure out your, perspective on something. And you can do a self-Socratic analysis. It does lead to deeper thinking. And then what's the other part here? Okay. Do we know what happened to Socrates? Socrates famously had to drink hemlock, so he was kind of put to death by the state because he was considered annoying. And well, you don't get put to death just for annoying, right? But bigger things. He's rousing too many people up. He's getting the youth. He's convicted of corruption of the youth. Some of that does have to do with sex, but there's the deeper part of it is where, if you're the kind of person who is getting people to think and analyze, the people in charge don't necessarily enjoy that. So think about that idea. And in any event, he was convicted, and he did have a chance to escape, but nevertheless, he decided to drink the hemlock and become a martyr. So you make up your mind about that one. So that is a brief look at Socrates, and let's take a look at Aristotle. Now, Aristotle, personally, out of all of these philosophers, I enjoy Aristotle probably the most because he's the most down to earth. Um, I think that because he was such a polymath, would be the terminology here, just where you can see this. It's just somebody who's interested in many different areas and is good at many different things. So, what was Aristotle interested in? What was he writing about? Well, there you go. Biology, botany, chemistry, ethics, history, logic, metaphysics, etc., etc. Political theory, which we'll look a little bit of like that at that. Look at all of that. That is a great mind. That is somebody who is interested and curious about everything in the world. And not only that, he studies it and he writes about it. We have Linnaeus, who puts together, this whole idea of zoology and how we're going to have a taxonomy of putting, animals with animals and plants to plants, etc. But Aristotle was the one who started it, categorizing. And if, that might seem, well, that's very simple, but categorizing is the beginning of being able to analyze, if you can put things together. So he was analyzing the world. Anyway, so he's Plato's student for at least 2 decades, and then he becomes the head himself of an academy. He instructed Alexander the Great. You can't do much better than that, right? He established the Lyceum in Athens, and one thing I did not touch on, he right here founded formal logic. So I don't know if you have studied logic yet, but that is where you have premise A, premise B, and all of those kind of highly structured way of thinking. So, and the logical fallacies and noticing logical fallacies and things like that. So if you have not yet taken a class in logic, I suggest that you should look into it. So finally, look here. What we're going to be reading about is two areas this week. One of them is the politics and how he looks at politics, the republic, right? Which is what we looked at a little bit last week with Plato. And then we're also looking at how he is talking about the theater and how it's important to analyze the theater itself. So you can see that he's talking about one, the applied politics, and then the other one is something that you would not maybe think is so serious, but it is the theater, which Aristotle is considering just as serious. And that will be our final thing to look at. Aristotelian tragedy and how he delineates and looks at how a tragedy should be judged. So following this, the following week, we're going to look at Sophocles, and you'll be able to analyze Sophocles through the lens of the Aristotelian tragedy. So what does Aristotle say? A tragedy must, if you look up here, tragedy, in imitation of an action, it must be serious, it has a certain magnitude, and the language must match the magnitude. So when we are going to see a tragedy being put out upon us, the audience must, the tragedy is not I broke my nail, right? The tragedy is not I missed my cab ride or whatever. Okay, it has to have a certain kind of magnitude. And when we're talking about Greek tragedies, they got a lot of them, right? The tragedy must have 6 parts. Plot, We're aware of what plot is. The characters, diction, the words that the characters use. You must have thought. Spectacle, that's kind of interesting. Everything must be presented in this spectacular fashion. And melody. Melody, think about that. It all has to kind of come together in a melodious fashion. What is the medium of tragedy? It is a drama, so you're going to see it acted out in front of you. A tragedy shows, it does not tell, so you're not going to be lectured upon what you're supposed to be seeing. Now, just pause there for a minute, because the ancient theater is definitely more telling than what we're used to at this point in the modern age. But back then, it was considered that, the tragedy is being shown to you. And what does a tragic hero have? If you notice this, the tragic hero must be noble by virtue or birth, but usually it's by birth, right? It's going to be a king. You must have the hamartia, tragic flaw, which is related to hubris. What is hubris? Hubris is excessive pride. So usually that's a big one with the ancient Greeks. Too much pride, right? Pride goeth before a fall. And the peripetia is a reversal of fortune that is brought along because of the hero's tragic flaw. And then the agnoresis, which is recognition that this reversal was caused by the hero's own actions. So the hero is going to have a tragic flaw. The tragic flaw usually is too much pride. You're going to have the character is going to be out on the top, but he's going to have a reversal of fortune because of his pride. And to top it off, the hero then needs to recognize that they are the cause of their own downfall, which you can think of is a painful way of being, right? I'm sure you have made some mistakes and have had to pay for them, and you go, damn, I caused this myself, because there's a particular kind of hurt when you go, I did this, right? I should have known better. I should have done something, but I did this. And it can feel quite poignant inside. Which brings us to the last part, which is catharsis. You might recognize that, but we spell it with C in modern times. Catharsis is when the audience is watching this tragedy unfold, that they have an emotional connection towards it, and they have an outpouring of emotions. But this is a safe place to have this happen, which is why we go to theater. Well, when we're modern day, this is why we go to the movies, etc. We can go there and we can experience a lot of these emotions, but in a safe way, because once the curtain closes, we can go, oh, whew, that was crazy, right? But we don't have to live with it. So we don't actually have to live with the true tragedy. We can feel it. We can feel the emotional purge, but then we can go home and live on with our lives. So Aristotle is saying that this is important, that tragedy must give the audience this kind of release and feeling, which you may or may not agree, but I'm sure that you have gone to the movies or something and felt some kind of emotional connection, whatever it is, if it's euphoria or you're crying and things like that, and it could be disturbing, but you don't own it, right? Maybe it's something that's affected you for a few minutes, a few hours, a few days, but then it's over with, right? It's not something that you live with for the rest of your life. So that is what we're going to be looking at this week, Aristotle, tragedy, and his thoughts on politics. And then next week, you are going to apply the Aristotelian tragedy and the tragic hero to our reading of Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. Thanks.